the mood inside Netflix headquarters wasn't exactly cheery. What was supposed to be the exciting rollout of With Love Meghan Season 2 had somehow turned into a slow-motion car disaster. And every week appeared to bring a fresh dent. The reshoots had barely wrapped. Editors were trying to piece the season together before the end of the month, and executives were already whispering about trimming back the marketing budget, not because they didn't have the money, but because they weren't sure they wanted people to notice the program at all. At the center of it all was Meghan Markle, and her latest press tour appearance had poured gasoline on an already smoldering PR disaster. She'd ascended the platform, flashed her practice smile, and launched into what she undoubtedly felt was an empowering speech. But instead of rallying fans, her statements lit up social media with indignation. She argued that modern women in America were unduly encouraged and controlled by the male demographic, and that they lacked the confidence to stand up for themselves. She spoke about herself as if she were some kind of appointed teacher for women everywhere, positioning With Love Meghan as a guide to become independent in both personal and professional life. On paper, maybe it sounded like a powerful feminist message. In actuality, it came off to many as self-important and patronizing. She didn't stop at critiquing gender dynamics. She wandered into commentary about masculinity too, suggesting there was a steep drop in authentic masculinity and a rise in toxic masculinity in 2025. She even declared that Hollywood would be better off if it was governed by women because, in her words, women were more level-headed and not blinded by vanity like men in the industry. Within hours, the reaction was in full force. Headlines depicted her as out of touch. Critics accused her of alienating huge swaths of the public, and Netflix's own analysts reportedly dubbed the marketing strategy a massive failure before the season had even premiered. It was the kind of news storm no PR team could entirely manage, especially since it wasn't the first time she'd rubbed folks the wrong way during the promotion cycle. Behind closed doors, Netflix execs Greg Peters and Ted Sarandos were dealing with a problem they couldn't just cancel away. Meghan's contract, according to insiders, was ironclad and pricey. Pulling the plug on Season 2 wasn't a realistic option, no matter how enticing it might seem. The only approach left was damage control, hiding the program as much as possible until it quietly arrived on the platform. Invitations to late-night talk shows like Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Fallon, and Seth Meyers were mysteriously pulled. The once ambitious marketing plan, reportedly involving millions of dollars, was cut down to the bare minimum. Even Meghan's fallback plans looked to be evaporating. Sources stated she had tried to gain work in ads, everything from insurance names to cruise lines, but nothing materialized. Those doors closed as rapidly as they open, leaving her without the safety net most celebrities rely on when the big acting contracts dry up. And yet, in interviews, she doubled down. She insisted Season 1's weak numbers were the consequence of audiences not understanding the format, rather than any flaw in the show itself. Now that the brand was established, she promised Season 2 would be a hit. She painted each episode as a lesson-packed blueprint for becoming both a proper woman and a real man, a statement that baffled even some of her own admirers. For Netflix, the task was no longer about boosting the show's profile. It was about keeping the fallout confined. The closer they got to release day, the clearer it became that they weren't promoting a crown jewel in their lineup. They were addressing a situation they had no choice but to air. The meeting room lights were dim, but the anxiety was blinding. A small group of Netflix decision-makers huddled around a large table, scrolling through social media reactions on their phones and laptops. Every few seconds, a new post would appear up. Screenshots of Meghan's statements with captions insulting her, threads dissecting her emblem of forceful female line, even memes comparing her remarks to bad motivational posters. The numbers weren't good. The engagement was high, but not the type anyone wanted. Ted Sarandos tapped his pen against the table and moaned. "We can't scrub what's already out there," he remarked, staring at Greg Peters. "We just have to control what's coming next." The premise was simple: reduce her exposure, restrain her from saying anything else that could ignite greater indignation, and pray that the show's core audience, limited as it was, would still show up on release day. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Netflix had once depended on Meghan being a PR magnet, someone who could generate attention with a single interview. Now, they were avoiding her like a liability. Meanwhile, the production team was in a race against time. The reshoots had been chaotic, driven less by creative vision and more by patching over what insiders called storyline inconsistencies and unfortunate overlaps with other content that threatened allegations of plagiarism. Editors were pulling 14-hour shifts, stitching together 8 episodes from a combination of new material and salvaged footage. The command from above was clear. Make it coherent, make it marketable enough to sell in a 30C second-hand trailer, and don't spend $1 more than required. Meghan, for her part, seemed unconcerned by the fury gathering around her. In a separate interview with an online lifestyle magazine, she restated her belief that Hollywood's future should be led by women, stating it would restore balance to the business. She positioned herself as a pioneer in that shift, crediting "With Love Meghan" as a cultural milestone that people would look back on as the turning point for her criticism. These words just confirmed what they'd assumed, that she considered herself less as a participant in entertainment and more as a figurehead, for a movement nobody had asked her to lead. The real headache for Netflix wasn't only the controversy, it was the contract. People close to the contract say it was negotiated during Meghan's peak media exposure, back when her name alone was considered to guarantee attention. It included clauses that made cancellation nearly impossible without incurring staggering financial penalties. And so despite the mounting bad press, the streaming giant had to keep moving forward. The safest path, they believed, was a stealth release plan. Minimal publicity, no live interviews, no high-profile events. The show would emerge on the homepage one morning, promoted just enough to satisfy contractual commitments, and then quietly drift into the library. That plan was already in motion. Guest bookings were canceled under the guise of schedule issues. Photo shoots were postponed indefinitely. Marketing teams were advised to shift funding to other future releases. Even the official social media pages for With Love. Meghan began publishing less frequently, replacing behind-the-scenes clips with generic advertising graphics that could be repurposed for months. Industry analysts were split on whether this would help or damage. Some argued that controversy sells and that burying the show was a mistake. Others believed that letting the commotion die down was the only way to avert a complete implosion. McColl's butt. For the Netflix executives in that conference room, it wasn't about winning back the public. It was about surviving the fallout with as little collateral harm as possible. By the time the final cut of With Love Meghan Season 2 was sealed, the atmosphere surrounding the project had shifted from frenetic desperation to quiet resignation. The editors had done all they could. Scenes were cut to eliminate anything that would generate additional outrage. Awkward exchanges were buried deep in the runtime, and dialogue was smoothed over with voice-over where possible. It wasn't art, it was damage control in episodic form. The release approach was already fixed in stone. At 3 a.m. Pacific Time, the series would appear on Netflix's homepage without fanfare. No billboard in Times Square, no red carpet premiere, no viral ad campaign, just a banner buried amongst a handful of mid-tier new releases. To the casual subscriber, it would appear like any other show slowly entering on the platform. Inside Netflix, there was a sense of waiting for a storm they couldn't predict. On one hand, the controversy may flare up again the moment people viewed the new episodes. On the other, it can fade into obscurity, disregarded by viewers more interested in the latest crime documentary or high-budget fantasy series. The reality was, no one could call it. Meghan's public image had taken bruises before, but this round felt different. The combination of her outspoken interviews and the visible retreat from the network had produced a narrative she couldn't readily alter. Media sources commented about her career trajectory with a mix of fascination and shot and freedom. Phrases like Hollywood exile and brand in free fall began showing up in headlines. Her squad, however, kept up appearances. In a final pre-release statement, Meghan called Season 2 her most important work yet, characterizing it as a roadmap for empowerment in a time when both women and men need clarity on identity. She insisted it was not simply entertainment, but education. The phrasing echoed her earlier interviews, a blend of self-positioning as a thinking leader and promoting the series as something bigger than TV. For supporters, it was conviction. For detractors, it was more evidence of tone deafness. When release day arrived, the response was swift but uneven. On social media, followers of Meghan defended the presentation vehemently, praising her message and claimed the backlash was overdone. At the same time, detractors deconstructed scenes, pulling clips out of context to ridicule online. Hashtags trended briefly, driven as much by irony as by actual discussion. Reviewers were blunt. One site called it a well-shot, but overbearing lecture, disguised as a cookery and conversation show. Another said it mistook monologues for meaning. Viewership numbers trickled and slower than normal. Netflix, as always, kept specifics close to the chest, although industry trackers observed the series failed to break the platform's global top 10 in its debut week, a sign that even outrage hadn't been enough to drive public curiosity. Internally, some saw this as a win. Less visibility meant less risk. For Meghan, though, the reality was tougher to spin. Without strong ratings or a fresh wave of positive coverage, her options narrowed. Studios were wary. Commercial brands that had earlier considered partnerships have gone mute. Even the smaller streaming sites known for picking up discarded projects looked apprehensive. The sense of inevitability hung in the air. Another chapter in the saga of high-profile deals that turned into quiet exits. Netflix moved on swiftly. Within days, their advertising attention had shifted to the next big release. And with affection, Meghan slipped down the homepage carousel. The strategy had worked in one sense. The roar had calmed down, but the cost was evident. What had previously been pitched as a flagship project had ended as a cautionary tale, put away in the company's history,